This is Grief and Grit, from heartache to high fives with a dash of sass. The podcast that turns the tables on traditional grief talks with a fresh, sassy spin. Listen in for candid conversations about the messy, awkward, and downright hilarious aspects of dealing with loss. Because sometimes the best way to cope is with a little laughter and a lot of grit.
Hi.
Hi, Simonie.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. I'm Simonie.
I'm Greer.
And welcome, everybody. It's so great to have you with us. Hope you're comfortable, got your cup of tea, and let's dive right in. So, bit of a warning with the series that we have going on this month. We are going to be dealing with pregnancy and infant loss, as that's the month that it is. It's Infant and Pregnancy Loss Awareness Month. And we are going to be featuring some really special guests who have endured these types of loss. This is a reminder to our listeners that this is a very sensitive topic, and we're completely aware of that. It's difficult for those who've experienced these type of losses, and also because in today's political world, it's so polarizing. But we all have our own beliefs, and we here at Grief and Grit really feel strongly that no matter our story, grief is grief, and we're here to help people feel less alone. We're trying to eliminate the judgment, the stigma surrounding these real life, experiences that we go through, and we're here trying to normalize grief.
So today we have a very special guest. It's my dear friend, Carly Sonenshine. We used to work together many moons ago before we were mamas. And Carly started out working with children and families, and now she's a licensed clinical social worker specializing in maternal mental health. And she has a practice here in Atlanta called Shine Counseling. And we will also have information for her website up on our website. But Carly, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We really appreciate it. I know it's really hard telling our stories, and you have really done so much work around supporting children and families, and now really working with moms who have experienced losses and other pregnancy challenges and complications. And fertility journeys they're so frequent, and women, it's hard for us to talk about it. But I find that when we do talk about it and share our stories, people come out of the woodwork and we feel less alone.
Absolutely.
So thank you for helping others feel less alone with your story. And we'd love to hear your story today.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on this podcast. I love the work that you are doing. It's so important. And I'm just honored to be a small part of it. So thanks for having me on today.
Thank you.
So in my work, I do see a lot of grief. I see a lot of loss. And in motherhood, that's not talked about so much. A lot of these stories don't always have a place in our daily lives, our daily conversations. And
Right.
I've worked with many women who hide that grief and loss, because it's an uncomfortable topic and it's not easy to talk about. It's not easy to talk
It's
about
not, I know.
in person, on a podcast right now. But I am happy to share my story because it is full of grief and loss. And it's unique, but it's important. And like you said, I'm definitely not the only woman who's gone through it. But as I experienced it in real time, women were coming out and supporting me by saying, oh, yeah, that happened to me and that happened to me.
Isn't that so crazy?
Yeah.
You
don't get that warning before motherhood.
Right. And then you're just shocked by how many people have experienced similar things.
Yeah.
It just blows me away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I will start my story with just the fact that I've always wanted to be a mom.
Mm-hmm.
I come from a long line of maternal women and big family. And I've had beautiful examples in my life showing me what motherhood can be. And then I think just by nature, I was called the mom of my college friends, and I was in, a babysitter and a counselor and all those kind of maternal helping roles. And now I'm a social worker and working with women, and I find that it really is kind of my calling. But to get to my personal motherhood journey was a big experience for me, ongoing through the years. And only now that I'm done having children, I get to look back and reflect on the story that it was. And so when I started out, my husband and I were married for about 4 years. We said, okay, it's time. Let's do it. We've both always wanted children. And at that time, we were encouraged, because of our ethnic backgrounds, to get genetic testing before we started, trying for kids. And so we were in the process of doing that. And I got pregnant pretty quickly. And it was before we got results back from this genetic test. So I got pregnant, so happy, rose-colored glasses on, like, this is great. It's going to be just like watching my cousins and my sisters and my aunts, and exactly how I imagined. Like, you get married, you have a baby, you start a family, you get, and it was so linear in my mind from what I thought was reality, but it wasn't reality. Growing up, you see people having babies and becoming moms and getting pregnant, but you don't know the behind the scenes that it took to get there.
Right.
And so in my mind, I had a very clear picture of what it would be like. And I was really excited for it, of course. And so I got pregnant and we were ecstatic. And then I had a miscarriage. And at that point, I didn't realize how common it was. But I soon found out that I would say like 1 in 3 women that I had spoken to who either heard or I shared that I had one came out and said, oh yeah, I've had one too. It's really, it's so much more part of the process than women realize.
Right.
And that support was huge, but it was also like, why wasn't I warned that this is a real possibility? Like not a one-off rare chance that it could happen.
Right.
But whether it's common or not, it's heartbreaking.
Absolutely. A loss is a loss. That's what a therapist once told me. And I firmly believe that. It hurts no matter what.
Oh yeah. And this hurt. And it of course hurt. And it hurt physically, it hurt mentally, spiritually, all the things where it's like, oh, I thought I was taking my first step into this. And now I just fell hard right back into reality of what it means to build a family. Which is that it's not always going to go as planned.
Right.
And so I came to that realization, and I would say I gave myself about a week to grieve that loss and to say, come to the reality of it, that it is more common than you realize. You're going to be okay. This is a small setback. It happened for whatever reason it happened. This was not meant to be your pregnancy. And let's pick up the pieces and move forward. And so that day, it was 1 week after I experienced my miscarriage. That day, we had the call to speak with the genetic counselor about our results, which we were not even thinking twice about. We were not worried. What are the odds? We've said that lots of times after that. Turns out odds are in my favor with my husband, in terms of, we've experienced where it's like, you're 1 in 1,000. We are that 1 in 1,000 in several situations we've had with growing our family. And this was one of them. So they came back and they said, you and your husband are both carriers for one genetic disorder. And so I was like, oh, okay, great. One week
Right.
after I was ready to move on, and now
Now you hit
it's
with
like
this.
another
Yeah,
setback.
another blow.
Right.
Yeah.
That was confusing.
Mm.
Because I just thought like, okay, so whatever, we're both carriers for this one rare thing. Like, how bad could that be?
Mm-hmm.
And on that call, I heard her say on the other end, well, this is what it is. And it's called CPT2 deficiency. And you're both carriers, which means each pregnancy that you and Adam have will have a 1 in 4 chance of having CPT2 deficiency, a 50% chance that they are carriers of it, like you, where they're not affected, and then a 25% chance that they've got nothing,
Mm-hmm.
not a carrier or the disorder. And we said, okay, odds are in our favor.
Right.
Mhm.
Great. And we said, well, what is it? And she said, I'm going to send you to a genetic counselor to learn more. But from the information I have, it's extremely rare. There are not many cases studied throughout the medical community. There are not many cases known throughout the world.
Mhm.
But it is a metabolic disorder that has 3 types of severity. One is a mild form where people live long, healthy lives with some health concerns, but as long as you have a healthy diet and are practicing preventative measures, you should be fine. You would live a long and healthy life.
Mhm.
The second form is more severe, and you have a lower life expectancy, in and out of hospitals, and kind of a complicated medical,
Wow.
It's hard.
life ahead of
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And then the third type is fatal. And
Mm.
if you should have a baby with this fatal form, you usually
Yeah.
don't bring the baby home, and the baby will pass away within a few days.
Wow.
It's
And
heartbreaking.
I said, okay, how would we know
Right.
which one?
Mhm.
Right.
She said, well, with medical research these days, you won't know until the baby's born.
Mm.
Oh my gosh.
That's terrifying.
And so
So you're
I-
expected to go through this whole pregnancy not knowing
Mm.
what the end result is going to be.
yeah. And then that was like, we had such a small chance that we would have something in common. And now she's saying we have a 1 in 4 chance that any child of ours could have this. And then if they should have it, it's a 1 in 3 chance that it would be a form that's conducive to a long and healthy life.
Right.
And so we just were confused
Mhm.
and totally thrown off and said, okay, well, what do we do now
Mhm.
with that? Like, it sounds like our chances are good, but what do we do with this information? And she said, well, you still have lots of options. You have IVF, where you could, test the embryos before you
Mhm.
implant them. You have an option to adopt. You have an option of a sperm or egg donor. You have lots of options. And that's where it felt like my world crumbled.
Mhm. Those are heavy options.
And although they are
Right. It's not a menu, like a
miracle.
restaurant menu, like where you're just picking things a la carte. Like
Right.
these are hard things to process.
Yes.
It's
And-
not what you envisioned.
Right. And they're miracles for people.
Exactly.
Millions of people.
100%.
For us, we were just, it was too raw,
Mm-hmm.
and we weren't in the right headspace to hear
Right.
those
Mhm.
options, that menu of choices,
Absolutely.
especially when we were just coming off of a loss of a miscarriage.
Right.
And then before that, the twinkle in our eye of what pregnancy and having children is supposed to look like.
Mhm.
Right.
And then that dream just kind of being shattered in the way that we think it's going to be carried out for us.
Right.
And while my husband heard it in probability, like, oh, what are the chances all of these things are going to happen?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Not in our favor.
Right.
I just hooked on to like, oh, wow, this is not going to be anything like I thought it was going to be from this
Right.
moment on. And that's a loss.
It's a huge
100%.
loss. That's 2 losses compounded
Mhm.
within a week.
Right. And it goes back to our episode on secondary losses. Simonie, it's again, you have this physical loss, but then there's also the loss of hope and dreams that come with, this type of news and having to adjust and, just figure out how, A, it's coping, and B, it's, figuring, okay, how do we move forward?
Right.
And it's just so hard for people. It
Yeah.
is hard. Yes.
And after that phone call, like you said, we were in a total decision paralysis. We
Right,
did
of
not know
course.
how we were going to move forward. And here we are, two young kids just really wanting to start their family,
Right.
but feeling frozen
Mm-hmm.
in how they're going to do that. Because we went to a genetic counselor, we went to a perinatologist, and they basically said the same thing, which we were really hoping they would give us some deviation of what was shared from the other one. And they said, nope, there is no way to know. There's just no way to know which type this baby's going to have. So your options are IVF and getting it tested.
Right.
But IVF is not a walk in the park, as anyone who's gone through IVF knows.
Not
And
at all.
I have a very real fear of needles still after 3 kids. I still do. Needles and blood. The thought of having to, give myself injections every day was truly terrifying. And then I'm also at an increased risk of breast cancer, and very much tied to hormones.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that was a real consideration too, because even though IVF, from what we were told by the doctors, won't create breast cancer cells, if you have it in your body, it could expedite it coming sooner than later.
It's a lot. That's so scary.
It was both options were scary because that was one option. And then the other option was try naturally. And then at 12 weeks, you can get something called a CVS, which is like an earlier amniocentesis.
Yeah. You got it. Good job.
Pronunciation of medical terms is my forte.
You got it. Better than I would say it.
And that was a risk to a pregnancy.
Of course.
And it's not a walk in the park.
No.
You're not medicated. It's painful, uncomfortable.
And a big needle.
A big needle, right? Needle on either side.
Yeah.
And then you wait for those results, which in our case, being that this disorder is so rare, it's not just a 2-week wait. It was more like a 6 to 8 week wait.
Wow.
Right. Because again, you have to wait for those cultures to grow. And that's similar.
They had to send it to a lab.
Exactly.
They had ours sampling had to grow extra and be sent to a further away, more specialized lab because not every lab has the ability to test for CPT2 because of how rare it is.
Right.
And so our wait was long.
It's excruciating.
We went that route. And then at the end of that, if it were 1 in 4 chance of it being positive that the baby was diagnosed prenatally with this, we had to make a decision to keep moving forward with a pregnancy or terminating for medical reasons. And Adam and I, my husband and I both agreed going into this process, we have to make that decision now. We can't make that decision when the results are given to us. Like, we went into it after lots of conversation and tears saying, let's make this decision. And to make that decision alone preemptively.
Right. And it's an impossible situation to make. And I just keep remembering when we were in that situation of like, what if we still don't know what it is? You're making a parenting decision. Like, you are a mom and a dad who are making that decision for the health of you and your baby.
And I have to say, that's where I might get a little teary-eyed.
I might too.
So, in times of struggles, I guess, when I am struggling, I seek connection. Some people seek isolation. I seek connection. It's like I grasp at straws to find connections to help ease my pain of whatever it is. And I felt very isolated and alone in what was happening. And I'm like, who could understand this? Because again, it's not usually posted on a podcast that you can listen to.
Right.
And so I thankfully had a friend named Greer, who I no longer worked with, but she was my connection to this devastating news and impossible decision to make before moving forward of, what do we do? How can we make this decision if we were to go that route? And so I called her and we met for coffee. And it was such a turning point in my story, truly, because we met. She told me about what it was like to get the CVS. And so she prepared me mentally for that. But then you just said it. It was the best, most powerful advice I could have received in this, in that you are a mom and a dad before a baby
Right.
comes to this earth.
Right.
And those decisions start from day one of conception,
Mhm.
which
They do.
means that, you know, whatever your decision is, for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
you are deciding for the benefit of your family and of your child
Mm-hmm.
and of the possibility of what it could be.
Right.
You know, a lot of people get pregnant and don't view it as a baby yet,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay. Some people say it's a collection of cells,
Mm-hmm.
an embryo, a
Right.
future, or whatever, an idea.
Right.
And everyone can have their opinions on that and their
Mhm.
beliefs on that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, it's still your enormous responsibility to make a decision.
Absolutely.
Right.
And there are so many, factors, of course, in
Mhm.
that. And so when Greer told me that, she was like, even if you make the decision to terminate the pregnancy, it's because it's what you think is best
Mhm.
for that possibility of a child
Mm-hmm.
and what their medical life could be,
Mm-hmm.
or the fact that if you don't know and they are born and they pass, what that could do to you, what that could do to your family, what that could do to your marriage, what that could do to your future children.
Correct.
There are so many considerations that go into making that decision.
Absolutely.
And I never thought of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it empowered me so much to move forward, knowing that even if I decided if the baby should have it and I had my CVS and it comes back positive and I terminate for medical reasons, I am doing it because I am a mom,
Mhm.
because it's for the benefit and to cut our losses of any kind of pain that could happen in the future.
Right. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And because of the uncertainty, which is a very scary place to live in.
Mm-hmm.
But we were, for, I would say, the majority of the years that we were, having our kids, we just lived in that uncertainty, a big waiting room of not knowing what was going to happen. And in the early years before our first, it was really terrifying. And so we had gone about 6 months trying to make that decision. Ultimately decided that for mental reasons, I just couldn't keep trying to go naturally or keep waiting to make a decision. And so we went the IVF route. And I did my intake and I was terrified and I got all the shots and the medicine and met with the doctors and had all the blood drawn. And then I was just waiting for my shots to begin when we went on a vacation to kind of
Decompress. Yeah.
after making such a big decision. And we returned and I'm pregnant.
Wow.
Whoops.
Wow.
Life, right? Twists and turns galore.
We can plan as much as we want, but
Yeah.
there's a higher power that says, okay, I'm doing it this way for you.
Right.
And I tapped into that because I
Right.
said, let's just see what happens.
Right.
Like
Mhm.
clearly this happened.
Mm-hmm.
The timing was, days before I was supposed to start my shots.
Wow.
And I'm like, let's just make sure I'm not before I start injecting hormones into
Right.
my body.
Right. Sure.
Sure enough, I was. I called the doctor. He laughs. He said, "You have no idea how often this happens. Once you stop thinking about it, you get pregnant, and, keep me in the loop." And so I had the decision was made for me,
Right.
essentially.
Right.
And I got a CVS done at 12 weeks. We waited. It was one of the most excruciating times in our lives, to be in that big waiting room of the unknown.
Yeah. I remember that. And it's horrifying.
Mhm.
And it's hard on a marriage too.
Mhm.
Yeah. The tension, all of it. It's
Mhm.
just really scary
Yeah.
and heartbreaking.
And it's all consuming.
100%. I could not agree more.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so the results came back, and it turns out our son is a carrier. And the relief,
Thank God.
the joy,
Right.
the celebration.
Mhm.
From that point on, I felt like I was able to regain a little bit of what I had lost.
Mhm.
We went through this scary, nightmarish thing, but now we know he's okay, and we can continue on with a quote unquote normal pregnancy
Right.
and delivery of our son, which we did. And, he's a healthy, wonderful, almost 7-year-old boy.
He's
Wonderful.
the absolute sweetest. I just adore him.
He loves Greer and Greer's kids. And then when he was 5 months old, got pregnant when he was 5 months old.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was truly shocking for the sheer fact that I had an infant in front of me and a positive pregnancy test.
I remember we had a play date with the boys, and I remember you telling me that you were pregnant. And I mean, obviously I was thrilled for you, but you were going through a lot. Like it was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are 15 months apart.
Yeah.
Wow.
That alone is tough.
Oh,
Yes.
But I was terrified.
Yeah.
It was like I just experienced so much in the first pregnancy, and I was only just starting to heal from all of it, mentally, physically.
Right.
It's a roller coaster.
And then I just got thrown back in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was terrified.
Mm.
And my husband was like, okay, this is happening. Remember, the odds are in our favor.
Right.
Mhm.
So I was in New York, and Adam, my husband, was in Atlanta,
Mhm.
and I was in New York with our son. And that's when we got the call that this pregnancy, this baby, is diagnosed with CPT2 deficiency.
Wow.
And it was the hardest day of my life by far. It was as hard as it was, and as kind of earth-shattering for me as it was, because I knew what our decision was.
Right.
Should it be positive?
Right.
And therefore, I knew that even though this was an unplanned, unexpected pregnancy, it was still a very much wanted pregnancy.
Correct.
And the thought of terminating a wanted pregnancy was hard enough for medical reasons.
Yeah.
But in our situation, and one of the reasons why it's so unique, is that we were just not willing to move forward with a 2 out of 3 chance that our child would suffer.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
And
I mean,
that was the decision as parents that we were making.
Exactly.
But there was a 1 in 3 chance that it could be totally, fine.
Fine.
And I think one of the things I realized this going through our situation, and until you're in it, it's just so hard. It's like when you said that you'll made the decision beforehand, and I feel like I'm a planner. I always have been. It's if there are different scenarios, I am going to think through every possible outcome for each scenario so that I am mentally prepared for each of those. But it's such a hard thing to go through. And until we're in it, we try to walk in other people's shoes, but it's impossible. We just can't.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
I remember, and it's devastating news.
Yeah, it was. This is where our story kind of takes a unique twist, because that day I was in New York, luckily surrounded by my immediate family,
Mm-hmm.
my sisters, my parents. And like I said, I was devastated. It was, a kind of pain I had never experienced before.
Mm-hmm.
And I had talked to my doctor, who said, I believe you're making the right decision
Mm-hmm.
based on the information that the medical community has, which is that there's no certainties
Mm-hmm.
with genetics.
Mm.
I think you're making a good decision for your family.
Mm-hmm.
And that gave me a little sliver of peace,
Right.
Right.
but it was still just devastating. Having to call my OBGYN to schedule this procedure. And at that point, I believe I was almost 16 weeks, or maybe just 15 weeks.
Yeah.
I had a very short window before I would have
Right.
to go to a clinic to have the termination done, versus in a hospital with my doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because of the lengthy time it took to get the results back due to the condition, just didn't have a lot of time to get it scheduled and done. That would be the least harmful, like emotionally, to me, I felt. And after that, later that night, I talked to all the doctors. I made my appointment. I was definitely not at peace with it, but I had a plan
Right.
in the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it was a plan. Did I want it? No. Was it happening? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started to kind of get in that radical acceptance phase of like, this is what needs to happen. You're
Mhm.
making the right choice, right? For yourself and for your family and for this potential baby. And then my husband calls the following morning and says, I've been up all night and I've been researching because something doesn't feel right. I'm like, well, of course, none of this is going to feel right.
And then you carried through with the pregnancy.
I carried through with the pregnancy, and her name is Layla, and she's 5. And she was born with CPT2 deficiency. She was the first baby in Atlanta to be born, prenatally diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
And we have definitely had our bumps medically. She's been hospitalized for it a few times, but
Right.
generally she is a happy, healthy, sweet little girl who
Wow.
is our absolute dream come true.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
She's
And
amazing.
to think of where it started to what we have now,
Yeah.
I count my blessings every single day with the way that it turned out, because had any of those factors deviated from what had happened, she wouldn't be here.
Right.
And I call her my dream girl
Right.
all the time. And
Yeah.
it doesn't come without challenges, and she
Sure.
will have challenges for the rest of her life
Mhm.
because of this disease. But she's here and
And
she's healthy.
And that's amazing.
And it's amazing. And then we ended up having our third. And man, those odds. He was born. We didn't do a CVS because we knew it would be the mild form if he
Right.
or she should have it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then he was born, tested, he has it.
Mhm.
So that his medical, impact hasn't really shown face yet. He hasn't had
Right.
any complications with it yet. He's 18 months. So we'll see what that looks like for him. But at least we were able to know, because of our story, that it was a livable condition
Mhm.
versus what it could have been, which would not have been livable.
Mhm.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a lot. I mean, it's how
That's
incredible
amazing.
to end up with these three, beautiful and energetic and just wonderful kids. I am lucky to know all of them, and they are just absolutely precious. Because of your background as an LCSW, Carly, can you kind of talk through maybe some things that you did or how you handled, like from a self-care standpoint, as you're waiting and, after getting some of this devastating news? I mean, grief is so hard, and grief doesn't always end. Grief is a journey, I guess, let me say, that is a roller coaster, and there can be happiness that comes out of grief.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that grief is happiness. Obviously, it's heartbreaking and devastating, but there can be glimmers. And I'm just wondering, how did you handle the grief as you're going through this journey? And what would you recommend to other moms and parents going through something similar to this?
Sure. So I'm very aware of the fact that my story has a quote unquote, happy result, happy ending. But I never thought that would be the case. Like, it is a true miracle what happened.
Right.
And it was not what I was expecting or planning for during the whole, time that we were making these decisions. So with that, I was holding on for dear life in real time when it was happening, getting the information, making the decisions, going through the IVF process, then not, then this, then that. And it was really hard to do anything. It was very paralyzing. It was just, I leaned on my family, leaned on my partner, but I also really clammed up because I could, a big part of me couldn't really process it because I was in real time going through it.
Right.
And honestly, it wasn't until after I had Layla, I was in such a fight or flight uptick in my cortisol levels from the stress of the decisions and the what ifs. And even when I found out that, it was going to be okay, I still wasn't connecting to my pregnancy. I was too scared.
Right.
Of course.
Right.
Of course. That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And it was such a different feeling than I ever thought I'd have when I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
I had after the results came back for my oldest, I had such a great pregnancy. I loved being pregnant until I delivered. And then, with Layla's pregnancy, it was such a different experience.
So much fear attached
and
to
so
it.
much trauma.
So much fear and trauma, right.
And it settled really into my body and my mind. And it wasn't until the third trimester that I was like, oh, I'm having this baby and I should get attached to it. And I knew it was a girl. I knew her name was going to be Layla. During that time, which I think it's actually I'm 6-year anniversary today.
Oh, wow. Oh my God.
I lost my bubby passed away. I was 6 months pregnant with Layla when my bubby passed away. And she just was such a huge, I miss her every day.
Yeah, I know you were so close.
So close.
Yeah.
And she was like my shining example of motherhood.
Right.
Her strength, her resilience, her pride, her everything. She was everything. And losing her during that time was significant. And I'm going to get back. So something that got me through the grief of the process that I had gone through, and then the grief of losing my bubby at the time that I did when I was pregnant. Someone told me that they believe that a loved one sometimes passes when one is pregnant to then become like a guiding light or an angel figure for that baby coming to Earthside. And I am a faithful person. I believe in God. I believe in higher power. And I just clung onto that.
Right.
And so a part of
Yes.
of answering your question, Greer,
Mhm.
is faith.
Faith, right.
Mhm.
Sometimes not everything happens for a reason. Sometimes there's
I
no
agree.
reason you can conceptualize, right?
Right.
It's just
Right.
not fair.
Correct.
Correct.
But that doesn't mean that there is not something bigger than
There-
yourself that you can connect to get you through the horrible things that happen in
Agreed.
this life.
Agreed. And I love the story of your bubby. And the reason I say that is because after Jared died, my dad went to a funeral and the grandmother passed away on the granddaughter's birthday. And she had done some research, and it's very similar that when someone dies on your birthday, it creates a very special bond. And that has happened in my family. So Jared's grandfather died on Jack's birthday.
Wow.
Jared died on his brother's birthday. And then my grandfather died on my dad's birthday. So there are just these really
Wow.
special
Yeah.
bond.
Connections.
So it just like, I know I have goosebumps like thinking about it. So hearing that, I again, signs, all the things, like it's just such a beautiful connection
Yeah.
that we probably would never think of, but it's there somehow, some way.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's what got me through the rest of the
Yeah.
pregnancy. Is
And
like,
is that your experience is what brought you to your shine practice
Shine
that you
counseling?
have?
yes. So for since before I had children, like Greer was saying, I worked with children and families who experienced grief and loss.
Okay.
And I was overwhelmed with the mothers that I worked with in terms of their strength, in terms of what they have to handle, and the little supports that was available to them,
Right.
and the little attention that their needs got. It was all about the kids. And it, of course it's all about the kids, but that doesn't mean that it's nothing about the mom,
Absolutely.
nothing about the parent.
Yeah.
You know, we're humans. We need support, and motherhood and grief and loss is overwhelming for anyone. And then when you add, you know, experiences on top of that, it's just everyone needs support through this.
Agree.
No matter what your
100%.
story is.
Yeah.
And so I was always kind of intrigued at, wow, these women really need much more support than they're getting. And why isn't there support in the community, in the medical field, in the whatever? And so that always interested me. And then when I became a mom from my first pregnancy on, I was like, whoa.
Right.
Like Greer said, you can walk in someone's shoes, but until you experience it yourself, did I realize like there is not nearly enough support for these people going through the journey to motherhood.
Right. And every situation is so nuanced, and finding the right support for each situation is really, really hard.
But there were such limited supports to begin with.
Right.
And
So true.
not talked about. Right.
Yeah.
Like through my story,
taboo.
I'm like, why didn't anyone warn me that these
Yeah.
things could happen?
Right.
Because maybe not
I
as
think
many
it's
women would have.
And it's not, I think it's also grief, any form of grief, anything, you know, you went through so much grieving. And I think makes people uncomfortable.
Yes.
There's an uncomfortable sense surrounding grief.
Yes.
And very hard for people to talk about it. And that's one of our main objectives here, is to make it normal to talk about.
Right.
And I think grief and loss is unfortunately a reality in motherhood and pregnancy. And so what inspired me to go into this specialty is, you know, there at that point, my experience was you just don't talk about it.
Right.
And if for anyone who knows me, that's not what I'm about.
Right.
You know, you name things to tame things.
I love
And
that.
just because you go through loss,
Mhm.
not sharing your experience or not speaking about your feelings or not processing through your grief does not mean it goes away.
Right.
Exactly.
It settles in to
It
every
does.
bit of your being,
It
Mhm.
does.
mentally, physically, spiritually, and people get uncomfortable,
Mhm.
of course, because it hurts. It's painful
And it's scary.
and it's scary.
because they don't want it to happen to them. It's
But
scary.
pushing it down does
Exactly.
not
It
make
really
it go
doesn't.
away.
Right.
It's like a pressure cooker.
Right.
I always say that
Yeah.
it's like you compound your losses, it's compounded one on top of the other.
Right.
And eventually, at some point in your life, it's like, whoa,
Right.
Mhm.
it just opens and these demons escape from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so for me, that experience was I wasn't able to deal with it in real time because I
Mhm.
just was like too just spent
Yeah.
at that point, having back-to-back kids. And I think Layla was 7 months old and I was still nursing her, and I fell into a very deep postpartum depression.
Mhm.
And when I started counseling for that, I realized I had so much unresolved trauma and
Mhm.
grief.
Yeah.
That was a pressure cooker
Right.
from,
Yeah. From way back when.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like 2.5
Absolutely.
years
Yeah.
of loss.
Right.
Right.
And I only started talking about it. And when I started talking about it, it spilled out
Right.
in a very significant way. And I was like, whoa, if I knew that this isn't good
Mm.
for someone to hold back like that.
Mm.
Right.
I knew I should have been getting supports at that time, but I was almost blinded
Mhm.
by what was going on with me. And that's me being a social worker. Like, this is what I do.
Mhm.
And I couldn't even see it for myself, how bad it had gotten. And so, Greer, like you had asked, how did you get through it?
Yeah.
And it took time to get to a
Mhm.
place
Sure.
where I could process and then truly grow out of
Right.
this grief that I experienced. And I have been doing that ever since. And a part of my growth from these experiences has been empowering women to also speak the fear and the anger and the not so good things about motherhood.
Mhm.
Because up until today's, world that we live in now, where it's starting to creep along and get a little bit more acceptable to talk about the things that aren't so great in motherhood.
Yeah.
But before this, there wasn't really any space
No.
for that. It was just,
Right.
oh, enjoy every minute. You're so
Yeah.
lucky. I know that bad thing happened, but look, you have beautiful children in front
Yeah.
of you. Be
Yeah.
grateful.
Exactly.
Okay, that's fine. But just like not talking about it, those positive reinforcements don't make
Right.
the bad things and the pain and the loss
Exactly.
go away.
It
And
perpetuates the isolation.
right. And
Yeah.
so my goal and my work is to empower women to find space for all of it, not
Mhm.
just the good, not just the bad, for all of the things that come along with motherhood.
And that
Yeah.
brings us to how wonderful and your vulnerability in
Mhm.
sharing your story today. And I know that there are so many of you listeners out there who have walked the same path and
Mhm.
in different ways experienced different grief and different loss along the way. But Carly, thank you so much for giving of yourself today and for your strong message, your strong story, and where you are and how empowered you are from it,
Yeah.
and to empower other women. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
truly,
you.
Carly. I know that your story is going to help others. And I am grateful to have you as my friend and grateful that you are here telling your story for others. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both.
And we just want to let everyone know that you can find all of our podcasts on any of the main streaming sites, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so on. You can also access our website, griefandgritpodcast.com. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or need any resources. Simonie and I are always here to help and support you. So thank you so much. And we'll talk to you on the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you love what you heard, please follow Grief and Grit and share our podcast with your friends and family.